In the South Portland district of Portland, Oregon, one of its most prominent stretches is Corbett Avenue, something I've walked many times. And every time I stumble onto something a bit mysterious, at least at the start, and after doing research find that others have been equally uncertain about it, my interest gets piqued. And while this is one of those more simple stories about one little spot in a city, it's still fascinating in that there's so much to potentially discuss about one location.
Oh, good. This is Nebraska. This is where I'm turning anyway. I'm like, which one do I do? Do I go that way or that? I love how these both go up. Yeah, I was figuring one's one way and one's the other. But I love this. I love that one of these is just smooth, straight up. And then this one's like, ka-dunk, ka-dunk, ka-dunk.
At this spot, running along Corbett between Nebraska and Florida streets, the avenue begins to climb upward. But as you can see, it also splits in two, with the west half of it angling up at a much higher grade than the half to the right. Today, both paved, they just function as two parts of the same avenue. But this was not always the case throughout history. As we can see in this image from 1939, at one time it seems the western half wasn't even paved. Some have commented online that they are dead certain this break in the road was due to a streetcar line that once passed through there. Cars went up one side and the streetcar the other. But as of now, there is absolutely no evidence to support this, regardless what people's memories or perceptions may tell them. But that said, let's get into this story and what we know about it. Now let me just say right here that I don't take any issue with one who might think this was once where a streetcar passed through, as the first time I saw it, that was my immediate impression. A streetcar went up one side while automobiles went down the other. And a streetcar line did run down Corbett Avenue at one time, just not this far south, but it came close. And when you really think about it, why would they split the road here in such a way if it was just to separate streetcars and automobiles? They hadn't done that anywhere else in town. What would be the point? Why not just have them climb the same grade together, which would be more affordable and take less work? It just never made sense to me. And while the west side goes upward fast before leveling off, the east side climbs more slowly with a succession of small climbs, leveling off at wherever crossing streets should be, even if some are no longer there. There were multiple car lines that did pass through this general area, often heading towards the Hillsdale and Burlingame neighborhoods. The first of these streetcar lines was produced by the Metropolitan Railway Company and ran from Northwest 2nd and Gleason south, where it originally ended at Fulton Park, but was later extended to Riverview Cemetery. North of our site, this streetcar did turn down Corbett Avenue for a stretch, but just south of its intersection with Hamilton Street, around Slavin Road, the line veered to the west and traveled along more or less where Interstate 5 travels today. It never reached the vicinity of Corbett, Nebraska. This is the line most often confused as having passed through our little Corbett split here, with some suggesting the west side was the right-of-way for the Metropolitan line. This is another understandable mistake, as the site looks like it could have served as such a right-of-way, and when this streetcar hooked off of Corbett, it was described, even in diagrams, as the line's right-of-way. It is also known that once this line turned off of Corbett, it ended up on a trestle for a distance, and there were clearly no trestles to be seen around here. A red electrics line went through the area as well, but also cut through just west of Corbett Avenue. The nearest stop to there being a 3rd and Miles Street stop, which would be smack dab in the middle of Barber Boulevard and 3rd Avenue by Fulton Park today, a few blocks southwest of our incline. Another Southern Pacific run line passed through here as well, but also ran in close proximity to where Barber Boulevard is today. But perhaps the most interesting in all of this was a line that came to be known as the North and South Line, initially one maintained by the Portland Railway Light and Power Company, and later run by the City and Suburban Railway Company. A later 1943 map of Portland's streetcar system shows this line had become part of the Williams Avenue line. Interesting, as this area was to the southwest portion of Portland, while Williams serves as a divider between north and northeast Portland. Regardless, this line is simply an altered version of that original Metropolitan Railway line, which ceased control of it in 1899, with one of its alterations being a continuation further on down Corbett Avenue. The line continued down Corbett until Nebraska Street, before turning east a few blocks and continuing south on Virginia Avenue. So this line literally made it to the foot of this site before turning away. We see the location in, again, this 1939 picture at a time in which this streetcar line passed by, so I can only assume the tracks are just off to our left outside of this picture. It appears the reason for this was they wanted to have an easier to reach lower elevation endpoint at Riverview Cemetery as the line traveled along Taylor's Ferry Road to get there, and Virginia Avenue just happened to terminate right at Taylor's Ferry Road. On a website that's dove in pretty deep regarding the question of this elevation in Corbett Avenue's purpose, Dielectrics.com, they mention even going around and looking for any remaining evidence of these bygone streetcar lines, particularly under where some trestles would have been, one of which would have been in line with Iowa Street. They mention finding the remains of old piers tied to the Red Electrics line. With this line running in close proximity to Barber Boulevard, I wonder if I stumbled upon these remains myself once. Back in 2019, while venturing through George Himes Park, I made my way down under Barber Boulevard, right in line with where Iowa Street would have passed through. And while there, while not paying much attention, I did catch on video some of what appears to be the remains of something that predated Barber Boulevard's bridge that crosses over there today. I can't say for certain if these are also those remains from the Red Electrics line, but I was in the right area for them to be. So if this whole thing wasn't streetcar related, then what was its purpose? Clearly it wasn't done for nothing. While I've tried to keep this whole thing somewhat shrouded in mystery, the purpose of this interesting little break in the road is rather clear. In fact, there are likely instances such as this in various places around the country, maybe even a few in the Portland area that I just haven't stumbled upon. And this purpose actually has some evidence to back it. But even with this perspective, there looms some questions, or at least one, which I'll get to. The answer to this particular question takes us back to 1912, a time in which portions of South Portland, in particular around Corbett Avenue, which I'll just throw in right now was called Corbett Street at the time because this was pre the Great Renumbering, were experiencing increased development. This included the building of many new homes, increased sidewalks, and grading on streets. In the May 12, 1912 issue of the Sunday Oregonian, a story was published about these changes wherein it mentioned that the first major improvement done was extending Corbett Street beyond Dakota Street down to the Fulton Park area. Dakota Street today is South Dakota Street, which runs 1 block north of Nebraska Street, meaning up to this point, this elevated stretch of Corbett did not yet exist. However, there were residences up there, verified by the following passage from this article, which explains everything on the matter. Quote, "The first improvement was that of extending Corbett south from Dakota Street to Fulton Park. To do this required the making of a heavy cut. 2 separate roads were made, one for residences on the right-hand side of the street, and the other for those on the opposite side. One road is 30 feet above the other. They are divided by a heavy rock and concrete wall. These roads open up a means of travel between many residences of the Fulton Park District and Corbett Street." So the construction of this stretch dates back to 1912, and, simply put, the road was split in two right here due to the rapid change in elevation in the area. Corbett was cut into a hillside. Had, let's say, only the lower portion of the street been made here, cut into the hill, it would have created a steep and likely treacherous incline for those who were living up the hill. The decision to split the street like this makes perfect sense considering those circumstances, and even today, with much newer architecture in the area, we can see the drastic difference in elevation of structures on the east side of Corbett Avenue from the west. We get an even stronger understanding of this elevation difference with this view from Idaho Street, going into only the lower run of Corbett Avenue. From the level of homes on the east side of the street, we can see how much higher up the homes on the west side are. Despite this resolution, however, there are still elements of intrigue to this story, albeit not of significant substance. But it is interesting. If both sides of Corbett were constructed to serve as different parts of the street, and there were residences on the upper side of it as well as the lower side, then why, 27 years later, in this 1939 image, does it appear the west side of the road is completely gone? Again, it's not of great significance, but it has me curious. I almost wonder if this side just wasn't paved for many years, as there's no indication that it was. It appears to just be a dirt road leading up to nothing. The only significant change I found that happened in this area around this time was the conversion of the streetcar line to a line of trolley coaches in 1937, but this had no effect on this ramp. There was also a picture from 1934 referencing a car climbing the Corbett Street Hill, which appears to be driving on a paved road. Perhaps it's referencing this steep climb, but I can't say for certain. We can see old markings from vehicles that went up this hill in this 1939 picture, but aside from that, it's overgrown by what appears to be several months to maybe a few years of growth. The word abandoned would describe it quite well, and yet we know the street is paved and exists again today. My thought is that possibly about 2/3 of this stretch was closed down, as this is where Vermont Street intersects with it near the top. In the 1939 picture, we can see no evidence of houses along the hill, suggesting at this time the only houses on the upper side of Corbett were further south, near the top of the hill. Along the way, the steeper portion of the street, perhaps deemed a tad dangerous for drivers, especially with how people drove back then, was closed down. Perhaps it was never really intended to be used that much in the first place. But that's all just a thought, and as residences were erected in later years along this abandoned stretch, the street was cleared out and revived to allow for the same kind of access that reportedly was being pursued back in 1912. And today it stands, more than 110 years later, not looking all too different from how it looked in its early years. If you're someone like me who spots something that just looks a little bit out of the norm or maybe makes you ask why, this is just the kind of spot that might capture your attention. And when all is said and done, the reason Corbett Avenue looks the way it does here is not all that complicated, and yet it's still a fascinating little nugget in an ocean's worth of history that the Portland area has to offer.